dialogue with ecology, with nature is interesting.
Yeah.
There's the like our view of like what the kind of indigenous peoples and like the idea of the shaman. Our view of what the shaman is so skewed by our kind of Western mode. What they're tapping into is not like, it isn't the supernatural. That's not sort of the that's not really the mode. What you have, and you still have it in these indigenous peoples that sort of say live like rural Asia and so on, that where these ways of living are still going on. Is what's clear is it's not the supernatural. It isn't the spirits. It's all about a really easy relationship with the natural world. So an example of this is a great book called The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abrams, who actually was a magician originally, who went out and lived amongst these people. And he talks about this, and he said he was staying in this compound, this shaman's compound, and the shaman's wife would bring him some fruit every morning, but she also had these little like banana leaves with rice in, and she was going off and doing something else with those. And he asked where they were going, and she said, "Oh, those are for the spirits of the house, right?" So. And then she'd come back and without them. So he was just wondering kind of what that meant and what he was doing. So one day he just kind of followed and watched her, and she was placing these little pockets of these little things of rice out around the perimeter of this compound. And he was watching it and from a distance, and he saw the rice start to move. And he had a moment of like, oh, this is the spirit. What is this? And then the rice moved along the ground, and it's ants. It's ants. So what she's actually doing, she's putting out rice for the ants. So then he had the thought of, oh, it isn't spirits, it's just ants. And then he realized, no, of course, the ants kind of are the spirits, right? So this is a house where food is prepared, where they have a lot of kind of big events, and an ant infestation would be just disastrous for them. So the offering to the spirits of the house is a kind of a dialogue with the ants. It's going, if we're going to put this rice out, if you just have the rice, if we do this every day, will you leave us alone? And then that's it. Like it's kind of that's it. It's quite simple dialogue and a sort of this lovely kind of embodied relationship with nature that, of course, we're so far from here. So interestingly, we do tend to pack a lot of ideas into the supernatural, even like the unconscious and depth psychology and so on, which I'm a big fan of. But we can take all the unknown stuff and shove it into these kind of bottomless pits. Whereas actually, interestingly, if you trace it back, it seems like it just wasn't like that. It was this very...
doesn't it depend on what they're doing, particularly with shamans? If a shaman is concentrating on psychedelic drugs, if they're an ayahuasca church and they're giving people dimethyltryptamine, like they are dealing with the supernatural. That's a very bizarre and intense, transformative experience they're putting people through.
Yeah.
And there's different, like that term shaman, it really, it kind of was very rare to be discussed up until about maybe 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's been some sort of a psychedelic revolution over the last couple of decades. And it's almost become a little bit too popular here, where a bunch of people are profiting from it, or they're opportunists and they're labeling themselves as shaman. I think the term that they use in Peru, they call them plastic shaman, and they're setting up shop and putting together this ayahuasca brew and having all these Americans come in, fly in, and Europeans that are looking for some, air quote, spiritual experience. And these are not necessarily pure shaman in the greatest sense of the word.
It's a different...
This is what we think of. When we think of shaman today, we think of someone who conducts a psychedelic ritual.